Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Rich Dalton, welcome back to the Center of the Universe, man. I have to mention that you were episode 220. This will end up being episode 231. I'm super excited to have you back. And as a reminder for folks, you're in California, I'm in Virginia, and we're going to get into some real topics tonight that kind of talk about your story from age 22 and beyond.
Awesome. I'm excited.
All right. So we were just chatting beforehand. When we ended the last episode, you were getting out of the Marine Corps sort of thing. And I assume you knew what you were going to do next. You already had something lined up?
I was back and forth. Law enforcement, since that's what I did in the Marine Corps, especially K-9 was my goal and I guess dream. But I was noticing that it was going to be a little bit longer of a journey to become K-9. Most departments wanted you to put in 3 to 4, maybe 5, 6 years. Border Patrol allowed you to come on directly as a K-9 handler in a couple other places. I got out in 2000, so it was pre 9/11, so there wasn't as many K-9 positions that popped up after 9/11. And so I was kind of on the fence. I missed wrestling a lot, which I wrestled a bit in the Marine Corps as well. I don't think I mentioned that, but I wrestled for the Navy's Southern Pacific team for a couple of years. But that was kind of just on my days off and things of that nature. So I was really contemplating wrestling and going back to college. So I did apply to a couple of police departments, but I really didn't have my heart in that. And so I ended up going back to college and did a couple semesters of college and 2 seasons wrestling.
Gotcha. And then, so what was your plan going to college? What was the idea?
Wrestling, wrestling and get a degree. The idea of learning and an education wasn't really my goal at the time. I just wanted to take classes to get a degree and continue or go back to wrestling. That was honestly probably my biggest goal.
Yeah, and we were talking about wrestling the last time we spoke, and you had talked about what it meant for you, but like hearing you talk about it now, like going to college for wrestling, like that's a real attraction for you. So remind me why wrestling?
It changed my life. I played so many other sports, football, baseball, 1 season of basketball that didn't go well, soccer, which I loved when I was younger, but wrestling, I started noticing lately. I think the reason why I loved wrestling was, one, because there was no breaks. It was nonstop. We were just constantly going. And it also allowed me to use my physicality a lot more and get a lot of my pent-up aggression out. Whereas football did that as well, but it was only when I was out there on defense. And if I was playing defense, the offense went out there, I was just standing there, lollygagging, waiting for the next play, the next call. And it was just a lot more about technique, and I was just a lot more about brute strength. And so wrestling really just connected with me, and I'd leave practice just exhausted, which is, I think, exactly what I needed. When I first started wrestling, I couldn't do one pull-up. I strong lower body, but not really upper body. And within 1 year, I went from 1 pull-up to 16 pull-ups due to wrestling and buying a pull-up bar. And so wrestling really changed my life. And one thing I didn't realize, that wrestling is a martial art, and I never realized that for quite some time. And it doesn't have the tradition or discipline as obviously karate and taekwondo and things of that nature, but it was a discipline, and that discipline is what I guess I needed.
Yeah, and that really stayed with you, right? Because you wrestled. I mean, I didn't realize Marines could wrestle for Navy teams. I get that the Marine Corps is part of the Department of the Navy, but that's pretty cool. You got to travel to do that?
So yeah, I'm still involved in wrestling even to this day. I try to go and help out at the Palomar College, and then at this martial arts school down the street. But I wasn't wrestling with the Navy's team. They had a Southern Pacific team, and I don't know if it was allowed before. I remember the commander, he was I think a lieutenant commander at the time in the Navy. He made some calls, and he was going to allow me on the team for temporary duty orders, but I just gotten canine. And when I brought that up to my department, they were like, no, we just sent you to canine school for 3 months. You've been begging for this. And I loved canine. I loved dogs. And that was my dream job going in the Marine Corps. Well, my first dream job might have been wrestling for the Marine Corps team, which I tried to do when I was in Japan. Mind you, I wasn't good enough to make the all Marine team. I probably wouldn't have, but I wanted to at least try it out. And that never never happened.
Gotcha. All right. So you're out of the Marine Corps. You're a student again, but you're out in California, right?
Yes.
And that lasted, you're saying a couple semesters. So that lasted roughly a year.
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years. Sorry. So almost 2 years. That's a long time. I mean, you had enough credits to qualify for an associate's degree, it sounds like.
I probably have enough credits for a bachelor's, but I just never followed through with any of that because I had gotten a lot of credits during the Marine Corps, and then I got credits before the Marine Corps. So I had probably maybe 80, maybe 90. So at least an associate's.
Yeah, well, 90 for most colleges puts you at the beginning of your senior year.
Yeah,
a college sort of thing. Any plans to ever go back?
Not for the degree aspect, but I have thought about taking classes. Just because now I'm in a completely different place in my life, and education is of vital importance to me. Personal growth is now what I run towards. Before, what I realized I ran towards was comfort, with the pain pills, with drugs, with women, with binge watching Netflix and fast food and all kinds of things of that nature, which was my demise. And now I sprint towards personal growth, and I have thought a lot about that, possibly going back there, to who knows what. But I get a lot of education from books and from people, as well as obviously the internet and things of that nature. But it's crossed my mind here and there.
Okay, right on. Well, if you're learning, there's nothing wrong with learning, and it's usually worth the investment to gain knowledge and gain how things work in the world.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So we did not talk about girlfriends or fiancés or wives the last time we spoke, but between episodes, you were dating somebody at the end of your time in the Marine Corps. Tell me that story and take me up until things started to turn south.
So I met her on the highway of all places, stuck in traffic. She waved to me. I waved to her. I tried to get her to pull over. She was pointing at her wrist, telling me that she was late. And finally, I convinced her to pull over on the side of the road. She gave me her phone number, and we started dating from there. That was probably about 3 months before I got out of the Marine Corps, and we hit it off. We clicked. Looking back, I have a feeling that we trauma bonded, and I don't want to take anything away from the relationship we had, but just, that's one of the things I realized is my old person, that's my old self. That's what I did was trauma. I bonded with people that had similar traumas that I had, and looking at my past and her past, I can see that now, whereas back then I couldn't. But yeah, we then dated for about 6 years before we got married, and we were together for 13 and a half total. So like I said, we were dated. So right after the Marine Corps, got out, was trying to figure out what to do, and ended up going to Palomar College, I think the next semester, and then her and I moved in together after I think we'd been together maybe 6 months. And so it was kind of sped up, probably because I just got in the Marine Corps, and then went from there.
I mean, it sounds like you guys really gravitated to each other pretty quickly. And I have to say, Rich, I'm 54. I've never heard of anybody meeting somebody they eventually married on the highway. Is that common? Is that common in California?
Not to my knowledge. And honestly, I've never met anybody before or anybody after that way. But it was just and what's funny is I can still remember what she was wearing, what she was driving. She was driving her mom's red Honda. She was wearing this like floppy hat. I can't remember if she was wearing her overalls, but I think she was. And so, but we had many great memories. We really did. And the combustion of that, if you want to call it that, or where that went wrong was definitely mostly on me. I look back, and she was a great wife, a great girlfriend, a great woman. She a phenomenal mom. I'm so grateful. God, I'm so grateful that really did a great job. You know, she breastfed them till they were almost 2. She worked out with me when I was doing personal training. She worked out with me till the week before they were born. She did it all natural. She just went above and beyond for them. She really did.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. So after you leave, am I pronouncing this correctly? Palomar?
Yes.
You leave Palomar, and what was the idea once you left school?
I left school kind of early, I guess. It was right after 9/11. And so right after 9/11, I guess that rocked me pretty good. I grew up 20, 30 minutes away from there. And so her and I moved back there, and we were contemplating staying back there for a while, I guess, back in Jersey, and it just didn't work out. She wasn't able to get into this nursing program there. I signed up for school there, started wrestling on that team, which is the team that I wrestled for back in '96 before the Marine Corps, same coach and whatnot. I think I wrestled in a match or two while I was in the process of signing up for a class, but I ended up being waitlisted, and it was just a club team at the time. And I do remember on the way down to one of the matches, I talked to the coach. I said, "Hey, coach, I just found out that they dropped me from the class, so I'm not an actual student." And he just kind of said, whatever, be quiet, don't tell anybody. And if I remember correctly, I think I wrestled that day anyways, but I was only involved with that for maybe like a month. And so we were back there for about a year and then came back out here.
So how were you making ends meet for that year?
I'd saved up a decent amount from the Marine Corps. I was getting I think I had my GI Bill. I had my disability coming in. My ex was working. I think I worked. I was a delivery driver, a pizza delivery driver with my old wrestling captain from high school, Jason, and rest in peace, who I miss dearly, and probably a couple other side jobs. But yeah, we were actually only out there 10 months. So we were there from December to October.
December 01 to October 02.
Yes.
Okay. And then you decided New Jersey was not for both of you, and you made the collective decision to go back to Cali.
Yeah, she missed her family. Her mom, or she has a big family, and they're real close, and they were all out here, and it just, it wasn't what I remembered it. It wasn't, people had moved on, things had changed, I had changed, and so I was like, yeah, let's go back.
And did you have a job lined up when you were headed back?
Not lined up, but I forgot about this. I had another job for the last 3 or 4 months there. I worked at the company that my mom worked at for a while, a limousine company, doing taking reservations and confirmations. I worked there for a couple months, and in that building, they had a gym, and one of the employees told me about the gym, so I went down there. I just wanted to go. Oh, yeah, we get to work out free. Well, it was a female, and I think maybe that was why they let her work out for free. And they wrote me into doing personal training. And I forget how much that was, probably a couple $100 a month. And so I said, okay, I'd always wanted to. And so I did that for, I think, a month or two. And that, like, all of a sudden a light bulb in my head. I'm like, this, man, I kind of thought about the personal training. So right when I got back here, probably a couple months later, I went and got certified. And then right after getting certified, I got my first personal training job once I got back here.
Gotcha. And so you've talked about physicality. You talk about physical fitness. Did that job really, really appeal to who you were at the time?
Oh, definitely. Because I always loved coaching in sports and obviously, like you said, health and wellness and fitness. I started coaching my senior year. I wouldn't call it coaching, helping out the little kids for the rec program in wrestling. And so I really, really loved that. When I went back, and that was the other thing I was doing when I was back in Jersey, I was helping out the high school team and the rec team. That whole year, I actually was coaching that year for the rec team. every practice and on the matches and all that. And then I helped out with the high school team. So that just helping, coaching, teaching, inspiring people was always something that was real close to my heart. So that just seemed to click.
And so I know you eventually became a law enforcement officer again. How long did you do personal training before you went back into law enforcement?
So I worked at that gym for about a year and a half, and kind of out of nowhere, they closed shop, and the personal training company kind of sent all of us and our clients over to this other gym. I worked there for maybe a month or so. It just was completely different. My clients didn't like it, and they were about to leave. So I went off on my own from there, and I went on my own and I started my own business, which I kind of still have and still work. There was Fitness Training for You. And I started that up and was worked out of a couple different gyms or trained down at the beach a lot or parks. And so I started doing that for the next 3 or 4, about 4 years before getting into, back into law enforcement.
So how old were you when you got back into law enforcement?
28, 29, 30. So
not the youngest guy to get back into law enforcement, right? It had to be a little hard to get back in your late 20s.
Thankfully, so it was for the Department of Defense on Camp Pendleton through the United States Marine Corps, and all the other bases, all the other services had been using civilian police officers for a while. The Navy, I guess, had been doing it since the 80s. Air Force had been doing it for a while, but the Marine Corps had just started doing this, and I had heard about this, and they were specifically hired for K-9. So that was what appealed to me. I was the third academy class there, and we had a lot of guys that were departments, or just retiring from the Marine Corps. We had a couple of younger guys, but there was also quite a few guys that were older than me. A couple guys in their 40s, even in their 50s. But I guess I was one of the older guys, but I still had a lot of spunk in me, and I was constantly trying to compete with them, especially when it came to the physicality part.
Yeah, and 28 relative to a 50-something is definitely not old.
Yeah, I think it was. If I remember, I think I was in my 30s. I think I was 30. I think I was 30 years old.
Okay. All right. And so by most of your life, well, certainly your childhood and your early adult life, what was your view on drugs?
Oh, I was completely against it. I completely believed in the DARE program. I tried weed twice when I was 18 to impress some girls on 2 different occasions. It literally took a hit. Even alcohol. I really never drank until my senior year. Well, so I thought, at least. And then lately I've been remembering pictures of me at 3 years passing a can of beer back and forth with my cousin at a block party when I was in New York City. And I brought that up to my cousin Sharon and she laughed and she goes, "Oh, you loved beer." I said, what do you mean by that? What do you mean I loved beer? Somebody that drinks a couple sips of beer one time doesn't love beer. So now I've been wondering, I'm like, was that a one-time thing or was that an often type thing? Which would make sense why I don't really have many memories of when I was, 6 and younger.
Hey, Rich, I have a memory of my dad drinking beer with his buddies, and he thought it would be funny to watch I think I was 4 years old at the time, watch me take a sip of beer. Of course, they had a few. And I'm like, maybe that was the only time he did that, but I don't know. Who knows?
Same here. And and mind you, I think I went over this before, and I would just like to just share this real quick. I've taken responsibility for all my actions in my life. I know my mom, my dad, my ex-wife, and everybody was doing the absolute best that they could. And I truly believe that I was as well. And I honestly, I love my mom, my dad, and even my ex-wife for all that they were and all that they did for me and everything about them. I have nothing bad to say about any of them. And I just don't want there to be ever any confusion with anything I'm saying. But yeah, I was, again, completely against drinking. I tried it a couple times here and there, but I remember in my junior year in high school and whatnot, my friend, one of my good friends that I grew up with, we'd laugh, be like, oh, those losers at parties, just, what do they do? Just stand around just drinking and talking? Like, that doesn't sound fun. And then right before my football season comes around, right before the first game, I fracture my collarbone and I'm out for the season. Well, I didn't know if I was out for the season, but I kind of told myself I was, because I wasn't even sure I wanted to play football that year. I was really focused on wrestling. And next thing you know, I was going to parties, throwing parties, and kind of having a good time from then till right before I left the Marine Corps. And so, but yeah, I completely against drugs. If I had a friend that smoked weed, I wouldn't be friends with. I would disassociate from them. I just was completely against it. And then hence why I had all the jobs, and every job I had was, I got drug tested, up until, even recently, from being a Marine, from wrestling in college, MMA, law enforcement and things of that nature. But I look back and I was a hypocrite. I was quite the hypocrite. I think in my late 20s, I tried steroids a few times, quite a few times. And I thought that was okay because I was getting them from a pharmaceutical company and I just all these things, how I rationalized it.
Yeah. So you had a couple surgeries, you were telling me, and they'd give you pain pills. You were on them for a couple of days, but then you had it sounds like another surgery. And roughly how were you for this other surgery where it wasn't just a couple of days of pain pills?
So the first couple of times I didn't like the feeling at all. I didn't like that feeling, I didn't like that feeling from weed. And mind you, I did try weed a couple more times in my late 20s and 30s. Again, just, a couple hits. I, again, never really liked the feeling. I just never, what's funny though is weed ended up helping me out so much. Once I used it with the right intention, it helped me finally be at peace. It finally, helped me just to be there. I just always had a hard time with that. I was always very anxious. I always had to be someplace else. I never felt comfortable in my skin. And weed helped me with that a lot later in life, after my addiction, actually. But yeah, so the first two was when I was 20 and then 22. Like I said, I took it for maybe a day or two. I didn't like the feeling, stopped taking them. I also realized I wasn't in pain. I had never had surgery, so I was expecting to be in pain. I took them because of that, and I got rid of them. So then I think at about 34, let's see, 2000, was it 2000? I guess 2008. Yeah, right at the end of my MMA career, I get this deep cut from doing box jumps on a picnic table, and it goes down to kind of the bone. I got put on pain pills, and it was completely different. It was 2000, maybe 2010, somewhere around that time frame, and it was just, it took all the pain away, all the pain in my body and all the pain in my head away, and it was just, I finally, honestly, it was probably the best I'd felt energy-wise and motivation-wise possibly ever.
And so what felt like bad to you for a couple of days, and you logically said, hey, I'm not feeling pain, I don't need this. I mean, and obviously the second surgery to the time you busted your leg on a picnic table, a lot of time had passed. I mean, we're talking about roughly 12 years had passed. You're 34, you've got a kid on the way, a 2-year-old, you're married. I imagine stress was at maybe an all-time high for you.
Yeah. And then getting this job, as a cop, which I don't think I really wanted to do. I'd wanted to stay with the personal training, but things happened the wrong way. My ex really wanted me to get a job that was stability. And I was really against that because I thought I had stability with the personal training. But, looking back, I see where she's coming from because I put a lot of stress on her with, not knowing exactly when I was getting paid and things of that nature. And so she really liked the idea of having that bi-weekly paycheck. And so I also think depression was setting in depression was setting in a lot more, stress and things of that nature. And life was just becoming, I guess, a little bit too overwhelming for me.
And so day 3, day 4, after you'd been worked on by the doctors, it probably put you in a place where you're like, hey, this feels really good.
Oh, it was probably day one. And honestly, there was little to no pain in my shin. It was it was a real deep cut, and I don't really remember any pain. But they offered me Norcos, and I said yes. And I think it was probably the next day or so. I wasn't hooked right away, but I will say I was probably hooked within a week or two. And I just remember slowly but surely, just all of a sudden, all the pain in my body going away. My shoulder, which I'd had problems with since I was 17, fractured my collarbone, my knee pain, my back pain, because I'd had a lot of back pain when I was 22 between the knee surgeries. I remember when I was 22, being with my ex and her little sister, we'd always go to all these amusement parks, and I was every 30 minutes having to sit down, having to take a break. I was doing that a lot when I was in the Marine Corps as well, where I was constantly on light duty because my back was just constantly just giving me problems, or at least I thought it was. And I'll be honest, I look back and I think it was emotional. I think it was just all this emotion I was holding on to and squeezing so tight, especially because the back pain and the knee surgery and all that stuff. The back pain all started right after the knee surgery, which also started right after finding out about Anthony, my 24-year-old. And so it just made me feel great. And I remember coming home from work, and I'd pop one of these pills, and all of a sudden I had energy I'd work 14-hour shifts, and I'd be able to come home and play with my kids and get on the ground with them. And I was able to kind of get back into jiu-jitsu a little bit, and I just felt great.
Yeah. So they're prescribed at first, right? And by the way, you said Narcos as sort of a generic term. Were these opioids? Yes.
Yeah. So hydrocodone, I was just getting 5 milligrams, but yeah, I was getting it prescribed for probably, legally prescribed to probably for 8 or 10 years. But that time I was on it for about a year or so. And then I finally started realizing after, missing a couple of days, I also started doctor shopping. I had my one insurance, and then I also had my VA. So I started going to both back and forth. They caught on. They tried to cut me off. Well, the VA cut me off completely. And then it was called Kaiser out here. They were trying to cut me off, and I begged and pleaded. But all of a sudden, for 3 or 4 days, I didn't have any, and the withdrawals were horrible. But all of a sudden, I realized the pain wasn't that bad. And so after that, I went cold turkey. I remember emailing my doctor saying, "Hey, thank you, but no thank you. I'm good." And so I went cold turkey off him for about a year. And I never really realized this till the last few months, but that year must have been miserable for my ex-wife. Because not only was I off the pills and cold turkey, I wasn't doing MMA. So I think I substituted those addictions or coping mechanisms. Well, they were addictions at that time, but my coping mechanisms were MMA and fitness. But I wasn't really working out because I was still in a bit of pain, and still obviously dealing with this withdrawals, because the withdrawals took about the diarrhea, the sweats and all that stuff that lasted for about 2 weeks, and then stomach issues for probably the next 2 months. But all of a sudden, as that went away, I think I really was taken out on her. And that's what led to the divorce. That was the last year of our marriage, and looking back, I must have really caused a lot of problems for her. And I don't want to go into too much detail, for her sake, but I did not treat her right. I manipulated her. I gaslighted her. I was a narcissist. And mind you, I didn't think I was any of these things. I really thought I was a good person because I would do this trading in my mind. Well, I did all these things for her. So even if I do these couple bad things for her, I'll make it up by doing these things. And I was just constantly lying to her, constantly doing just really bad things. And she'd catch me with some of these things. And mind you, if it wasn't for her, I would have no problem sharing all of it. But I don't want to cause any pain or damage to her. But I just, I'll say it. I cheated on her quite a bit, and a lot of times it wasn't even physical. It was just on the internet, talking to women and things of that nature. And it was never because of her. She was great. She really was. But I was one of those people that, well, you should have known. Why didn't you do this for me? I know I didn't ask, but you should have known. Just a lot of that nonsense. And again, at the time, I really didn't really see it, but I just had so much anger inside me since I was a kid. So much anger, so much rage, so much depression that all was untreated, that I didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't know how to cope with it. I didn't even know it existed. And then these pills, like I said, were this magic thing that came away. And so, yeah, that definitely, I think, was the one of the key. Well, that wasn't the key factor. I was the key factor, but that played a big part in ending the marriage.
So you become drug addicted at the age of 34, I think you said.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yeah. And how long were you before you went cold turkey?
So that was, I went cold turkey for about a year, the last year of my marriage. So that was probably about 2011. And then my cousin, who was 40 years old, had a massive heart attack on his way to work and was in a car accident. And I went back to New Jersey for that. And while I was back there, she sent me a very cryptic email or text. And I called her, and she just kept telling me she wanted to talk to me when I got, and I kind of forced her to. And then she just told me that she wanted a divorce. And I think that's when I got back on the pills, and then it was off and running from there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's shocking to me that you got divorced when you were clean.
Well, I think, well, like I said, at that time, I was taking it as prescribed, maybe a little bit more. I was taking it when I drank on the weekends. Well, not every weekend, but when I did drink, which was probably at least every other weekend. So I was mixing it with other things, which I'm sure concerned her. But that time when I was clean, I was a dry drunk, is what what I'd call it. I wasn't going to AA. I didn't go to rehab. I just went off of it. And I think I replaced that way to cope with my problems with, other women or trying to seek out other women or talking to other women online and being very negative towards her. And then especially my MMA career just kind of ended, which kind of ended abruptly because of this, as well as I think in my last year of trying to fight in 2009, I had 9 fights scheduled and then 9 fights canceled. And I was, so that was, that had been my big part of my life for about 6 or 7 years while I was doing the personal training. And so that was, definitely very depressing for me.
So you did MMA before you got back into law enforcement, or is it while you were doing law enforcement?
Before, yes. So while I was doing the personal training and right after college, at Palomar and whatnot, I got into MMA.
All right, we're talking about a lot of heavy things here, but I think we're going to bounce back. I want to talk about maybe a couple of stories from your law enforcement with the DOD out there at Pendleton. I think I want to explore the addiction a little bit more, but I'm fascinated. I don't know any. You're the only person I know that has ever competed in MMA at the highest level, right? You were with the UFC for a while.
Not the UFC. I fought for King of the Cage, Total Combat, and Strike Force. Strike Force got bought by the UFC. So my second to last fight was for Strike Force at the Playboy Mansion. It was the Playboy Mansion's first ever MMA fight. And that was a guy that was undefeated. This guy, Daniel Puder, who was from the WWE. And that was the first fight on the main card. So I really thought that was going to slingshot my career. I was, 3-2-1 at the time. And it being at the Playboy Mansion, it was streamed on Yahoo Live. It was the first time Yahoo. And I got started in kind of in the beginning of MMA, not the complete beginning, but at least the beginning out here. My first couple fights were in Mexico. My first 2 fights were in Mexico because it was illegal still in California. And then I fought in Georgia. I was supposed to fight in Colorado, but the guy got injured right before our fight, and then I fought Mexico again, and then California, and then at the Playboy Mansion. Like I said, I thought that was going to be my big breakthrough. I lost by decision. And then my next fight was King of the Cage versus another guy who's undefeated. I beat him. And so by this point in time, I'm 3-1, 4 wins, 3 losses. And, but at the same time, I was a very boring fighter. I didn't take many chances. I was a grinder. I would throw an overhand right, shove you into the cage, and try to beat you up from there and just kind of lay on you. And so, and at the time, the refs would, if there wasn't enough action on the cage or on the ground, they'd stand you back up or they'd put you back in the middle, which I didn't like at all. And so again, like I said, I was just pretty boring yeah. So, I trained with a lot of legends back then. Dan Henderson, who was still to this day one of the best MMA fighters. I trained with him for quite a few years. Jason Lambert was ranked as high as number 9, I think, in the world at light heavyweight. Quite a few other guys in the UFC, Joey Beltran, Eddie Sanchez, and then just a bunch of other guys, Brandon Vera, Mark Munoz, Boss Rutan, Rampage Jackson.
You trained with all these dudes? Yeah.
Rampage only like twice, Boss Rutan once or twice. Jason Lambert was, we were on teammates for several years. Joey Beltran and Eddie Sanchez were my teammates as well. And then Dan, I was part-time a part of their team. I don't know if you remember Sokoju, who was ranked, I think, number 4 in the world. He was one of my main training partners for a while as well. He was just killing it in Pride, and quite a few other guys that I've trained with and worked with.
So, and this was all in your 20s?
Late 20s, or I think late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, so you were in MMA when it wasn't nearly as widely accepted as it is now.
Oh, not at all. Yeah, it was back when the UFC. So this was back UFC 40. So UFC 40's right around the time when I started training jiu-jitsu. I'd gotten about 6 months jiu-jitsu training under my belt, and that was when I took my first fight. But yeah, back when they were doing UFCs like every 3 months. So it was very, very different, and it was really hard to get fights. I didn't have a manager at first for the first couple of years, so I was the one making all the calls. I had a great coach. This Ross was my coach for my first probably 4 or 5 years or whatever, and then I went with another team because they had a management team as well as a coaching team, and I thought that would give me a leg up.
Yeah, so I think when I Googled you and I put in MMA, I swear there was a reference to the UFC, but it may be because the connection to Strikeforce.
Yeah, that and now MMA's just almost always, because I when I pulled up my name as well, it just MMA and UFC, especially if you get like if you pull up my profile on ESPN, it all seems to looks like falls under the UFC. But yeah, just Strikeforce right before they got bought by the UFC. I tried out for the Ultimate Fighter a couple times. And one time I think I had a chance because I had an in. I talked to, back when it was Spike TV, I think it's Paramount now, but I was talking to their executive director, and I thought I was about to get in, but I was getting married in Vegas during the filming, and I thought that's perfect. While I'm there, get married, while I'm there fighting, if you guys could just let me leave for the day, go get married, and I'll come right back. And I thought this was a great idea. And I thought that was, I actually had a tuxedo shirt with my cat, who was black and white at the time. So he kind of looked like he was wearing a tux. And in my video that I sent in, they're like, yeah, you wouldn't be able to get married. I said, well, we got like 200 people coming. I can't. They're like, sorry.
I mean, sometimes you have decisions that are not easy to make, but you at the time made the right decision.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. All right. So it seems like everybody in MMA that gets to a professional level, whether it's UFC, Strikeforce, or one of the others, everybody seems to have a nickname. So before we discuss your nickname, is that a thing? They're like, hey, we get your name's Rich Dalton, but we're going to need a nickname from you. Did that happen early on?
They don't ever ask for that. When you do the fighter profile, whether it's online or for the fight, there is a part there where it does ask your nickname. And I never personally had a nickname for myself, but I think it started with my manager, Manny, and I think he's the one who gave me the name Double D, which was Dick Dalton. And then for a little bit, it was Triple D, which is Dirty Dick Dalton, because of a whole silly incident that happened, But so Double D, it was the only one that I guess I had. I never referred, and only a couple people that I knew referred. I think it actually still on the Sherdog website, which is connected to ESPN, so it might still be on there.
So just Dick Dalton, but nobody ever called you Dick, right?
No, but so they thought that was funny, and again, I was just a very uptight person back then, so I probably didn't like it, so that's probably why it stuck.
Oh, that's how nicknames stick. No
doubt.
Of
course, yeah. The ones you like, they never stick.
Unless you're like the champ, then I guess you get to call whatever you want.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So when they introduced you, it was Rich Double D Dalton.
I think only for my last fight at King of the Cage, yeah. But besides that, it was just usually Rich Dalton.
Okay. So the world only got to hear Double D come over the mic once.
Yeah, maybe twice. I don't know, but like I said, I think it is on Sherdog.com. I think it's still on there.
I mean, it'll be associated with you for the rest of your life, sounds like.
Yeah, one of my students brought it up the other day. He goes, hey, Double D. I say, excuse me, what? And they don't know much about. I said, where'd you get that from? Nothing, Sensei. I'm like, hold on, what do you mean? And so then they asked me what it was about, and they didn't seem to really get it too much, but.
Yeah, well, it's, I mean, at least you had a nickname that lots of people heard. I don't know whether I want to explore your fighting style first or next, or the fight at the Playboy Mansion. That had to feel surreal.
Oh yeah, that was great. I ended up getting to go a second time doing security there, so which was just amazing, and obviously I'm grateful for all these opportunities without a doubt. But yeah, that was pretty crazy. That was my big chance, and I wish I would have been. Well, I don't wish everything happened, but looking back, I remember I guess I was pretty tense. I didn't have my normal cornermen in there. You were only allowed to bring 2 cornermen. It was something like $1,000 per person. So they only let you have 2 cornermen. They wouldn't let any family members. Nobody could buy tickets. They had a bunch of, B and A level, a couple B level celebrities, but maybe some, I don't mean to say it like that, but like I remember Joe Rogan was there. Jamie Priestley was there, and Joe Rogan's by no means B level, or either is Jamie, but at the time I knew their faces, but I didn't know their names. A couple other people were there. Gary Shandling was there, who I was a huge fan of his show, and I didn't know about him being there till years later. Hugh Hefner came out right as my fight was starting, because like I said, my fight was the first fight. And I remember seeing him walk out with the 2 girls. Either I remember seeing him walk out, or I remember seeing him sit down as I was in the cage. And I got to go in the grotto. Chuck Zito was there. I tried to talk to him about the New York Yankees. He didn't want any of that. But I got stuck in a front headlock majority of the fight, and rather than fighting out of it, I was just using a defense, hoping he would get tired, and he didn't, and kept getting me in it. I kept, in a sense, putting my head in it, kept using that same defense, and in a sense, again, hoping that he'd get tired, and I kept my game plan. So and if you listen to the fight, that's what the commentators talk about. Frank Shamrock was the commentator who I briefly talked about. He just moved out here to Carlsbad. I briefly talked to him about it off Instagram a couple months ago, but both him and the other announcer were saying that I stuck to my game plan, which I do agree with. But I was trying to pressure him. I was trying to force him into later rounds. He'd never been he'd never went the full distance. Most of his fights he'd ended in the first round. I think all of them he did. And so, yeah, it was a great time. But I remember my head felt like a bowling ball afterwards. Well, excuse me, my neck felt like I was holding up a bowling ball just because he'd been hanging on my neck the entire time.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned Rogan. I listen to Rogan's podcast from time to time. He has an unbelievable memory of fights and of details that the typical person wouldn't. If I had a chance to meet Joe Rogan and I mentioned Rich Double D Dalton, would he remember?
Probably not, but I'll be honest. I do look forward to the day that I speak to him or hopefully get on his podcast, because he's been a huge inspiration. He's been a huge help in my recovery. He's been a mentor without even know it. And because of the people that he's had on, from Jordan Peterson to Sadhguru to Jay Shetty to, God, I shouldn't even start a listing because there's so many others that I don't want to miss their names. He's opened my mind to so many different books, to David Goggins, so many other things. And then even him, to watch his transformation, to now listen to him talk about kindness and compassion. Mike Tyson has been another one that's been on a show. So he's been huge. And I know he talks about redemption stories and comeback stories. And obviously I know I have a great one. And especially because I'm willing to talk about it all. Like I have no more shadows anymore. I have no more, all my closets are open. All the skeletons are, and there's not many people that are willing to do that. However, the only reason why I'm willing to do that is because I gave up everything. I lost everything and then gave up everything. And it was after losing everything, I just said, well, let's get rid of everything as well, and I've really gotten rid of almost all of attachments. I haven't dated in almost a year. I stopped watching porn, stopped masturbating, stopped dating, stopped having sex, and all kinds of things. It's been about a year. Gave up food. I usually only eat once a day. I eat my cell phone. I gave that up. I turn off my service. I only use it for Wi-Fi. I do have a work phone now, for work purposes, but I same thing with my living situation. I've kind of been in transition where, and like I said, every single time where I've ever questioned where I was going to lay my head at the end of the night, whether you want to call it God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, has always came through for me every single time, especially in this last year. Take it back for the last couple of years, especially since I've been on this path of trying to be of service. Because like I said earlier, I run towards personal growth. The other thing I run towards is being of service. If anybody calls me at any time and asks me for help, if I am capable of helping, I'll be there. I will never ask for anything in return. I will never ask for a cent in gas. I will never, and most of my clients, heck, I never realized and looked at it this way, but a lot of my clients, I pay them. I don't pay them to be my clients, but I'll lend them money if I ever have any extra money. I'll drive them places. I'll pick them up. I'll help them. I've helped them move, as well as friends and other people. I just feel like I need to be of service. I want people to take advantage of me. I realized that probably about a month ago. I want people to say, oh, Rich is a strong guy. He could probably help me move. Call me up. Hey, Rich, I had a buddy call me today. Hey, I'm going out of town. Would you be willing to stay in my extra room and watch, him and I were cops together. He actually called me just about an hour ago. He's like, I know you know how to handle a gun and handle yourself. And my wife is kind of scared after the racially charged shooting. And would you mind staying the night there? I said, on it. Gotcha. And I love to be of service now. And again, not only do I not expect anything in return, I don't want anything in return. I usually go out of my way to say thanks, but no thanks. And I will never down the road say, hey, remember that one time that you did this? Can you do that? Will never happen. Now, mind you, I say those things because I used to be that way. Remember that one time I did, you need to help me out now because that's not me anymore.
Yeah. When you and I first spoke on the phone, you talked about most of the world is constantly in the middle of negotiating or discussing some sort of quid pro quo, very transactional. I don't view you as a whole person. I view you as a means to something I want. And I try to live like that, but it's hard. So the
It
fact
is.
that you're doing it all the time, it probably feels great to you.
It does. And mind you, a lot of it, I say circumstance, but it's not. Because one thing I never really got into detail with you about on the first podcast, when you asked me, what am I up to today? I was a little bit hesitant about some of the things, and I didn't want to come across as too arrogant or cocky, but I live a very disciplined life right now. And whereas, again, like I said before, it was the exact opposite. I would go to work and be disciplined there to a certain degree, and I would train and be disciplined, or work out. But in between that, I was usually running home to the couch or to the chair, and I was just always in pain or just constantly tired. And I really believe it was because my mind was just constantly spinning from the could'ves, the would'ves, the should'ves, the guilt, the regret, the shame, just the anger, the regret. I had so much regret. If I would have done this, I shouldn't, and just all those things. And anytime those things would pop up, I'd have to shove something in my face, in my throat, food or soda or a drink or pills or drugs. And so now, I have those coping mechanisms within me. I can take a deep breath. I can go for a walk. I can meditate. I can read. I can listen to a book on tape, or I can listen to some kind of motivational speech. I have other ways, or just going out and being in nature, being in the sun and getting fresh air. Those things are such great, but breath work is probably my biggest one. If I ever do get overwhelmed with anything, I can just take some deep breaths or do some breath holds, and I can snap right back.
Yeah. So Rich, we're going to do a third episode together. And I think that third episode is you talking about what kind of was, for lack of a better way of describing this, your rock bottom, and then coming out of that rock bottom, and then thoroughly exploring what your last year or two have been like. So we're going to go for a little over an hour here. We're at roughly 55 minutes. I want to talk a little bit more about your time with DOD at Pendleton. Was that a hard gig? It doesn't seem like a lot of crazy felonious things would happen in a place like Camp Pendleton.
You would think. You would think. And that's what most people said. Oh, you're not a real cop. And mind you, it was different. It wasn't the same as New York City or LA or things of that nature. But the big difference is the things that happened on that base stayed on that base, because the only way the media was allowed to come on base or to talk to anybody is if the military allowed them. And so there was a lot of things that happened on the base that nobody, and that Vanessa Guillen Fort Hood incident is a perfect example, especially all the bodies they found after that. And we had murders, drugs, gangs, especially right when I got hired on and before that, because Oceanside at that time had, one of the reports I'd gotten was 26 known gangs in Oceanside at the time. And
26?
Yeah. And within a 3-year period, two cops were shot and killed. And mind you, Oceanside's I think it's about 200,000 the population, and so it's not a big city, but it's also not real small, and so there's 26 supposedly known gangs, and I think in around 2010 they actually had to zone off 2 areas where there was no gang affiliate. If 2 people were caught wearing the same color shirt, they were allowed to be pulled over and get their information taken, especially if it was red and blue or things of that nature. So that spilled over onto the base. Coyotes was also an issue. People, a lot of, whether Marines or things of that nature, going down to Mexico, picking up people, going through the base to avoid the checkpoint. We had a couple terrorist events where they were using the base to the paintball park to train, as well as to get to know the base. We had a couple other incidences. I was a canine handler, so decent amount of bomb threats, decent amount of drugs. And mind you, as a canine handler and just an officer, I didn't know all the deeper stuff, NCIS, but we had a helicopter crash. I was, second on scene for that. We had, I was the murder that we had a murder. I wasn't working that day for that one, but one roommate killed there's a couple murders during my time there. But yeah, I was canine, and one of the reasons why I went canine was, well, one, I love dogs, but I'd go on missions, and so they'd send me to New York. When I was in the Marine Corps earlier, I got to go to Greece and Italy and Iceland with as a canine handler for HMX. This time here, when I was a DoD officer, I went to New York City for 2 weeks for the G6 GA conference or whatever it was, which was great because I got to go to my hometown with my dog and see some old friends and stuff like that. But it was really great the first year or two, and then depression, stress, and all that stuff really beat me up, and I was just a crappy employee. I just was very unreliable, getting there late, 2 minutes, 3 minutes late, calling out of work, just couldn't be depended on, and that just spun out of control over and over again. The first 2 years, I was doing a lot of martial arts with them, so that was really good too. But then that group of guys, they left and they got stationed elsewhere because I worked with Marines as well, and just things changed and I changed, and then they've been trying to fire me for my last couple of years. They were trying to get me on my weight because my weight got up to about 250, 255. I was using my thyroid as an excuse, which I know played a part, but there was so many other factors, and I wasn't even trying to really lose the weight. So then they ended up transferring me over to dispatch. So I became a 911 dispatcher for the fire department for the last year and a half, and then they were finally able to fire me from there. Yeah,
wow. Sorry to bounce around like this. I had mentioned earlier I didn't know what to explore next, the match at the Playboy Mansion or your style. And you had talked about your style being kind of boring. With a wrestling background, what you typically see, maybe I've been watching some of the lower weight classes, but they'll go for the legs, for the takedown, and they'll wrestle against the cage or they'll wrestle off the cage, but it's usually going for the legs. It sounds like you mentioned an overhand right. It was basically to get them on their heels, moving backwards towards the cage, and then you just mauled them into the cage. And
exactly.
What you got to the cage, were you trying to take them down?
Sometimes, but I started working a lot of upper body stuff. My MMA coach Ross was a judo guy. Lou, who also was on the Marine Corps wrestling team there with Greco, and he's the one who brought us up with Dan Henderson. We trained with Dan Henderson, Matt Lindland, and I think Randy came up there once, but they were all Greco guys. So I started trying to do a lot more Greco stuff. But if I could get the takedown without putting myself in too much, risk, I would. But if not, I would, short little uppercut, a lot of dirty boxing, a lot of grinding, just a lot of pushing and shoving against the cage. My teammate Jason Lambert taught me how to use our heads right up into the neck and the carotid artery. And so I would do that a lot, or try to do that a lot, and just try to grind. And if I got the takedown, again, I'd just get there and grind and try to ground and pound from there.
So dirty boxing in boxing is truly dirty, but in MMA, it's completely allowable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So you remember, like I do, the first UFC, right?
Oh, yes.
Royce Gracie. He's out there in his gi, and he's taking on guys like twice his size, and he ends up winning the whole thing. And I distinctly remember two things were really compelling to me, or at least got my attention. One was the fact that it was mixed martial arts. Like, what a crazy concept when it first started. But you love the idea. I'm going to see a brawler go up against a jiu-jitsu guy or whatever it was. The other thing that was just, as an American male, this was appealing to me. No holds barred, except I think you couldn't eye gouge in UFC 1, and it might have been like you couldn't do something in the privates sort of thing.
No, you were allowed to. The first, up until I think UFC 5. Remember the one guy he punched the guy in the groin repeatedly.
That's right. That's complete. So it was eye gouging. Was it one other thing?
Eye gouging and biting, I think, were the only rules for the first couple of UFCs.
Okay, and then by the time you got to around UFC 40, when you got into it, it sounds like things had normalized a bit.
Yeah, a lot more rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense.
Oh, without a doubt. And and what's crazy is the sport has only had, there's only been a couple deaths. None have really been due to the sport. Because I honestly think it's much safer than boxing, because once you get a couple hits that aren't being, 2 or 3 punches or kicks that are not being defended properly, the fight's over. And, any good ref will step in. Now, mind you, obviously getting punched repeatedly in the head during practice and fights is not healthy at all. Yeah, I remember when UFC 1 came out, UFC 1993, that was exactly what me and my friends used to talk about all the time. What if Bruce Lee was alive versus Mike Tyson, or Chuck Norris versus or a wrestler versus a boxer, and that's exactly what they offered us, and they put it up there on the table for us.
Yeah, and so as a guy who trained with Dan Henderson and the Greco guys, and you had a standard wrestling background, and you had, sounds like there was a judo influence. Did you have anybody that was really honing in on boxing skills, or is that just never really going to be a big part of your fighting?
I went and did Muay Thai for about a year, and I worked with a guy did American kickboxing for a little bit, but I did Muay Thai with a guy named Ruben here in Oceanside. My buddy Josh was a real good boxer. The MMA team that I finished with, North County Fight Club, they would utilize a little bit of boxing, so but again, it was mostly to get to my grappling. And my fight at the Playboy Mansion was the only time I actually stood up and banged with somebody. I think he caught me with a punch, and that kind of woke me up. And I said, finally, I didn't want to wrestle anymore. I kept pushing him off me and trying to, and I think I could have knocked out, but I connected on a couple shots, and then he kind of locked me up. And I remember my coach yelling at me, Matt, was, push off, get off, get back in the center. And I wanted, for the first time in my career, I wanted to so bad, because I thought I had him, and I was tired. He was tired. He was hanging on me. And so, but yeah, it was, boxing was just, again, means to an end to get to the wrestling.
Yeah. Something about wrestling with you. We probably joked about this last time. I was a basketball guy. Wrestling did not have any real appeal for me. But talking to you and other guys that really love wrestling, I get it. It was never for me, though.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Yeah, all right. So we have talked about a lot. Are there things in this part of your life that we didn't talk about? Because I do want to get together with you one more time to really get into this arc of like really, really low to where you are now, which I've only known you for the last, couple of months, and you appear to be in great spirits and wonderful health, both mentally and physically and emotionally.
And honestly, I am. I'm back to church. I'm being of service. And church doesn't mean it. I don't even know why I brought that up, but it's just allowed me to explore my spiritual side again, and even more so, seek out people that are like-minded, as well as people that are just looking for answers and be of service. I try at least twice a week to work with the shower programs that give showers to the homeless community. We started a clothing drive at the dojo that I'm at, Champion Eyes, where we're collecting clothes for these organizations. I work with about 5 or 6 different organizations, not directly, but indirectly. A couple with them directly, but indirectly. But yeah, as we talked earlier, that addiction and getting fired led to homelessness and a lot of rock bottoms where I was actually homeless for a year with my kids in motels. I didn't call it homeless. I just called it transitioning. And mind you, I didn't think I was homeless because I'd had an apartment and then I didn't. And then I had rented a room and then I was in motels and then I rented another room. But I was, and I couldn't get it together. I really couldn't get it together. And so yeah, there was a bunch of rock bottoms after that. I overdosed with my kids in a Motel 6.
Yeah, Rich, we're going to save that one for the next one.
Yeah.
That's an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
I think that probably, if you had to pick one bottom, that was probably it, I'm guessing.
You know what? I've tried to, you know what I mean? That was one, definitely. My mom's passing 2 years ago. That was another. There was quite a few. There really was. Losing everything I owned. For me mentally, looking back, it was not a big deal, but everything I owned was in storage. So that was, when I lost all that, because it was a lot of stuff for my kids, getting hospitalized, getting 5150, I wasn't arrested, but I was basically hospitalized by the cops came, the fire department came, because I was having an anxiety attack, but overdose. But I don't even know how to explain it. We can, touch that next time as well. But that was a big rock bottom as well, where I was literally fighting the cops at, I think, 6:30 in the morning in front of a 7-Eleven, and it was five firefighters and 2 cops. I hadn't been sleeping that week, and I was just, my mind was really spinning, and I was really having some severe mental breakdown. So that was another rock bottom, and I think I told you about the home invasion at the place I lived at. That was another. So.
Yeah, so it sounds like we've got plenty more to talk about. The guy I'm talking to right now, I can't imagine being in front of a convenience store at 6:30 in the morning fighting 7 guys that are there just to make sure you don't harm yourself or others.
Yeah, well, I made a big scene there, so they had to come at me that way. And I remember thinking to myself, I was fighting them just enough not to get tased and not to get sprayed. And that's one thing I used my law enforcement for, because during my addiction, I think I spoke to you about this before off of here, but I was stealing a lot of stuff from stores, electronics and things like that, to sell to make ends meet, to buy toys for my kids at first, then buy food, and then to buy pills. And well, it all came back to pills and drugs that I was, needed the money for. And so, yeah, these are, the drugs, the stealing, the acting out like that. These were things I would have never done. I'd been raised properly. Like I said before, I had father figures that were cops. I'd always thought of myself as a straight out person. I never stole from people. I used and abused my mom while she was going through her cancer treatment, borrowing money from her left and right, knowing that I wasn't going to pay it back. Well, I thought I'd be able to pay it back once I got clean, but I had no idea when I get clean, and I didn't know how to get clean. I didn't know if I wanted to get clean for many, many years. And
yeah, man, you are. I think you said something out on Facebook today or yesterday, something to the effect of most champions have overcome a lot of adversity, and very few that were born and lived in privilege have achieved such heights. And so, yeah, so most of the adversity you faced, I can't imagine you wish on anybody else, but it's made you who you are today.
And you're right. But you know what, though? I would not, and I know this might be hard for some people to hear, but I would not change a thing, because you look at that butterfly effect. If I change one thing, that changes everything. And then on top of that, all the lessons that I learned from all those rock bottoms has built me into this person that I am now, that I'm finally proud of. I can finally say I love myself, which I never could have before. Because I didn't know what love was. I'm still having a hard time receiving and giving love. But I finally love myself, and I love who I am now inside, not, because I used to look at myself from the outside. I saw myself, whatever I saw in the mirror, I hated that. I couldn't stand that. And just all the guilt and the regret and shame and all that, I just couldn't deal with it. And so there was just so much anger and hate and misery in my life for majority of my life. And mind you, I say that, and maybe this person, that person, oh, I knew you were happy. I had bouts of happiness, without a doubt. There was plenty of, and I had a mom that tried so hard. I look back and I'm like, holy, how did she do it? I put her through so much problems and so much, but yeah, I was, a very different person now, but I wouldn't change anything. I have no regrets anymore. And if my kids were to hear this, yeah, they might be, that might bother them. That might hurt them.
I don't think when you say that, I don't think you mean it in a hurtful way.
No, and you know what? I look forward to the day that I can share these things with them. And I don't know when that will be. I don't know where that will be, but I know that we will reconnect. I talk to them, those, my middle and youngest son, I talk to them usually every other week. I haven't talked to them in, like I said, 2 months now. I don't know if they're busy. I don't know if they don't want to talk to me anymore. I don't know what's going on yet. But I know that if as long as I continue down this path, which I know I will. I have all the faith in the world, which is something I never had before. I know that whatever I put my mind to now, as long as I put in the work, stay disciplined and stay consistent, it will happen. And I have many other dreams and things that I'm creating, businesses, ideas, programs, and obviously being, back in my kids' lives, as well as I would love to be back in my ex-wife's life and her husband and my oldest son's I would love to be a family, and again, in a weird way, and maybe that doesn't happen for, months, years, decades, I don't know. But I truly believe that love will shine through.
Well, the good news is you can control how receptive you are to all those things. And so you're doing your part, man.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, hey, Rich, your story is unbelievable. Well, many aspects of your story are unbelievable. I look forward to talking to you the next time, and I appreciate you joining me for a second installment of your story. Again, I am beyond grateful for this opportunity, because this has been one of my other purposes, to share my story. I know there's plenty of people that need to hear this. And the last thing I want to say is this: I know that I'm going to be judged. I know that people are going to judge me. I actually shared some of these stories with one person, and he turned to me and said, "I want to punch you in the face right now." And I thanked him. I said, "Thank you for being honest." I said, "I can't even imagine how many other people have thought that, but because of my size, because of my background, they didn't want to say that, but they thought that." And this guy's a black belt in martial arts, so he felt confident enough to be able to say that. And I'm like, "Thank you." I said, because I know I'm being judged, but I also know that I'm planting seeds. I know that there's people that are struggling. I know there's a lot of people that are struggling out there, because I've had many people reach out to me that have heard a little bit of my story, or followed my story from afar, or at close up, close friends. I know there's people, because I remember how miserable I know this, whether they're, whether they realize it or not, whether they're in the addiction, whether they're homeless, or whether they think everything's okay. And now I'm able to see the red flags, how people cope, all those unhealthy coping mechanisms that are out there. And I can see those people that are in a lot of pain. And if I can help by being in any way help, I'm more than happy to. And I've shared before, but all my information, my pictures, even my before pictures when I was 305 pounds, are on my Instagram and Facebook, and anybody's more than welcome to look it up and check it out. And message me or ask me questions or reach out to me. And I'd love to help anybody, from the Lyme disease community, from addictions or homelessness or mental health or fitness or obesity or anything. All right. Well, Rich, you're the man. I may have been judging you subconsciously, but my thoughts are, what an incredible story. I want to be part of telling it. And I'm very, very happy that you are where you are now. Thank you so much. I'm so appreciative for you connecting and this opportunity.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.